What's up, everybody? Nate here. So it looks like Russia is about to face even more economic issues in 2022, as they're currently on the verge of defaulting on some pretty huge bond payments. At the moment, Russia owes around $117 million on 2 sovereign euro bonds. Russia has said that they have completely made this payment and that they are not going into default. However, nobody has really been able to be sure that they've made these payments as of yet, which means the clock is officially ticking, because if those payments ultimately don't go through, well then Russia now has 30 days to pay them, or else they're going into default. And they're not completely out of the woods yet, because they have a ton more payments coming up, and we're talking in the billions of dollars. That's all going to be extremely difficult for Russia to pay off when they don't have access to banks, they don't have access to SWIFT, and they don't have access to US dollars, which is pretty much the reserve currency of the world. So today I want to go over what exactly it means for Russia to default on its debts, and if they do, what that's going to mean for the future of our economy and the world economy across the globe. But before I get into all of that, do me a quick favor and hit smash or destroy that thumbs up button below, and ring that notification bell too. Both of those two things are completely free, and they help to show me that you like this video and that you want to see even more just like it. Thank you so much for doing that. Now let's talk all about Russia and its possible debt default. So Russia, as of recently, has faced some financial issues. For one, their stock market is completely closed right now because it started crashing to record lows because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Number two, because of economic sanctions placed on it from the United States, the UK, and the rest of the world, the Russian ruble, which is basically the Russian dollar, is worth less than 1 US cent. And number three, countries around the world have been targeting Russian oligarchs and their central bank for the last 3 weeks or so. That means pretty much nobody in the country can spend their money. And on top of that, businesses have closed their doors in Russia because they don't want to operate in the country while there is a war going on. Basically meaning that Russia is getting no income right now. And according to some experts, this whole Russia-Ukraine war and economic sanctions placed on them is going to send Russia's economy back by nearly 30 years. And of course, Russia is funding a war in Ukraine, which is not cheap. With all that being said though, Russia is not getting any money right now. So world leaders were really concerned when these debt payments started to come up, because how is Russia going to pay for them? Well, right now there are basically 2 accepted ways that Russia was able to pay off its debt right now and how it will do so in the future. The first is from its own reserves. Every single country around the world has a reserve amount of money, an amount of money that is set aside in case pretty much anything bad happens. These numbers aren't exactly public knowledge, and we don't actually know where all of this money is held. But it's generally accepted that every single country across the planet has some type of monetary reserves. For the most part, this is US dollars, because the United States dollar and United States government is such a strong country. Countries around the world want to hold on to it. There is a need for it because the US isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And when you have GDP that is the highest in the world, people typically want your money. So there is a belief that Russia actually had to pull $117 million out of its reserves in order to pay off these initial interest payments. Russia is only going to have a certain amount of this money though, so when the rest of this debt comes up over the next few months, they're eventually going to run out. And their money is worth basically nothing. 1 ruble is worth less than 1 US cent. Typically, when a government runs out of money and it faces a debt default, it just turns the money printer on. The United States has done it many times in its history, but the difference is the United States dollar is the strongest currency in the world. If you turn the money printer on for the ruble, well, now you're just increasing inflation even more in your country. That's going to be a problem when supply chain issues in Russia and its economy is already tanking. The second is, of course, bonds. So in the United States, we have things called treasury notes or treasury bonds. This is essentially something that people can buy that loans money to the United States government. The government can then use that money to do whatever they want, and then they pay you back with interest. All across the world, governments use this strategy. So there is a belief that possibly Russian oligarchs stepped in to pay off some of this debt for its country. What they did was purchase these bonds from Russia. So now Russia is going to have to pay them back with interest at some point. Now, we don't actually know if that happened yet. We're gonna have to wait to see if there's any bondholders that come out of Russia over the next few months or even years. Hedge strategy is something that countries need in the short term. However, like I said, they eventually have to pay that money off. If they don't, then that creates even more issues, because now you have all of these people that purchased bonds, but they're not actually making any money from them. That can kind of lead to some anger from your people. And if Russia goes in the opposite direction and starts paying those people back, well, what is it going to pay them back with? Rubles, which are basically worth nothing, or US dollars? And it can't exactly get US dollars right now because of all of the economic sanctions. Now, what would it actually mean if Russia went into a complete debt default? Well, this would be the first time that the entire world has seen this since 1998. And if Russia actually defaulted on its foreign currency, that would be the first time it's done so since 1918. Like I said, it's not usually something that happens because there's always ways for countries to pay off debt. They can offer things to other countries. They can start printing more money of their own. And of course, they can start loaning out and trading with another country's currency, so that way they have more of it. However, Russia is completely cut off from that right now. They're not able to bring in foreign currency, and that is a big deal for the future of Russia. You see, basically, how our world financial systems work from a very simplified point of view is you have dominant currencies. So the United States dollar is the dominant currency of the world. That's why it's the reserve currency. The United States is super strong and everyone wants US dollars. That means that people want to do trade with the United States because they want to start collecting those US dollars so that they can go out and buy more things and take on even more debt. And debt isn't necessarily a bad thing for a country because it means that your country is growing and expanding because there's a need for money. However, you got to be careful with which currency you're bringing in and which currency you are trading with. A country doesn't want to hold on to trillions of dollars worth of a currency that is worthless. They want to do trade with countries that are going to bring them value. A lot of that has to do with the United States and a lot of European countries that use the euro. But Russia right now isn't going to get any of those opportunities. Because of this invasion of Ukraine, the rest of the world is basically just turning their back on them. The United States has imposed so many economic sanctions on the country, and there's effectively no money going into Russia. The only money that's going into Russia is from some other countries like China. That means when this war ends, hopefully soon, Russia will be left with only rubles to do business, and nobody's gonna want rubles in exchange for their services. That money is basically useless, so Russia's gonna have to try to figure out a way to grow its economy from the inside out. It can be done, but it's extremely difficult. And if Russia ends up defaulting on all of its debts, well, that could end up meaning that people stop looking to Russia for any type of financial security. Investors within the country, and of course people who are looking to start businesses in Russia, are not going to do so if the entire country is not economically stable. And from the very beginning, before Russia even actually invaded Ukraine, the country has said that it has all of the funds necessary in order to pay off all of its debts, meaning there would be no possibility of a debt default. So if they were to default, that would basically show their people and nations all around the world that they're lying. And countries are not going to want to work with another country who is actively lying to them. In addition, like I said, people are going to exit Russia as soon as they can because now there is no financial security whatsoever on a personal, business, or sovereign level. But that is from the Russia perspective. It not only would crumble Russia's economy, but it could also crumble Russia as a country. What would it mean for other countries throughout the world? I mean, Russia owes other countries this debt, right? Well, exactly. So Russia owes billions of dollars to several countries all throughout the world. If Russia isn't able to pay these debts off, well, then the countries that are owed this money are eventually just going to have to eat the cost. And depending on how serious this is going to depend on how much Russia owes to a particular country. So if Russia only owes a country a few $1 million, well, then that's not really going going to be a big deal. That country can just bring in more tax revenue or just print money in order to make the problem go away. Sure, inflation in this situation would go up, but it's not going to go up significantly like we saw in 2020 and in 2021. Of course, now if we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars, even on trillions of dollars, well, that's going to make inflation go up a lot because countries now can't typically generate that much tax revenue that quickly. So whatever the money is actually tied up in is going to have to be funded in some other way, or those countries are just going to have to print more money. Either way, it kind of creates a pretty serious issue for economies. Right now, world economies, including the United States economy, are super fragile. Inflation is going way up and supply and demand issues are only getting worse. And with interest rates in the United States starting to go up right now, the United States cannot afford to have other countries stop paying us. But it also means that the money from those countries gets even more useless, because if they were using their currency to pay off that particular debt, well, now they defaulted, so they don't have any money, which means nobody wants that money. So all of these countries throughout the world that are holding on to rubles for whatever reason, well, that money is basically just a big paperweight. There is no reason to have it anymore. And for Russia, that means an even bigger devaluation of their currency. Now again, I think this has bigger implications for Russia than it does for the rest of the world. I don't think Russia owes the United States hundreds of billions of dollars. I think it owes hundreds of billions of dollars, but to all different countries throughout the world. So it's gonna sting if the US and other countries don't get this money back, but it's not gonna be the end of the world if Russia doesn't pay. Now for Russia, it's gonna be a huge issue because now your currency is worth less. Investors are gonna pull even more of their money. People aren't gonna want rubles anymore. And your entire economy and country is essentially going to collapse. Not only that, but you lose credibility on a global stage. So now countries aren't exactly gonna wanna work with you. So that is a pretty serious deal. And it just goes to show how powerful these economic sanctions have been on Russia. There has kind of been a debate recently about if economic sanctions actually work when it comes to war. And in this case, they are already starting to work. It's more of a long game because these countries have to effectively run out of money, but over time, they typically start to work in other countries' favor. Now, if we were talking about the United States going into a complete debt default, well, that would be a much more serious issue for the entire rest of the world because the United States dollar is the reserve currency. If we couldn't pay our debts anymore and we didn't want to print our way out of it, well, now all of these countries that are holding on to US dollars would basically be useless. The biggest one would be China. We owe China trillions of dollars worth of debt. If we couldn't pay, then they would have to find a way to make up those losses. And we're not talking a little bit, we're talking trillions of dollars. So when we talk about the United States and the power of our own currency, that would be a serious issue for the rest of the world. And of course, it would be an issue for us for all of the same reasons of why it's a problem for Russia. And again, if this payment that they just made went through, then that is a good start for Russia, but they are not out of the woods yet. They still owe more money and they're gonna have more payments as the months go on. Things only get more complicated though as the rest of the world imposes more sanctions on them and their war gets even more complicated with Ukraine. So they're gonna have to figure that out first. All the more reason for them to end this war in Ukraine. But now I want to hear from you on this issue. What do you think about this potential debt default from Russia? Do you think this could essentially lead to a complete collapse from Russia as a country itself? Or do you think that Russia actually has all of the money to pay off its debts and its money problems aren't really an issue at all? Whatever your thoughts are, leave a comment below before you go. But that is it for today's business and financial news breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date with all of the top business and financial news from around the country, our team puts together a free daily newsletter and you can subscribe to it by clicking the link in this corner right here. And if you want to stay up to date with me and everything happening in the business and financial world, I'm putting out uploads 7 days a week over here on this channel, and I've actually got another one ready for you right here, so be sure to check that out before you go. That is it for me, everybody. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.